What if I told you the fastest, most flavorful meals aren't new trends, but ancient Native American secrets that carried forward into kitchens during the toughest times? Imagine a skillet of tomatoes and crackers sizzling into a humble crumble, or popcorn glazed with sticky molasses filling a room with laughter. These 5-minute fixes weren't just food, they were survival tradition and comfort passed down for generations. Before we begin, do us a favor and hit like and subscribe. It helps us keep these memories alive. Today, we unlock 10 vintage 5-minute recipes that fed America when time and money were short. When cupboards were nearly bare and fresh food long gone, families often turned to the last can on the shelf: pan-browned canned potatoes. Simple, sturdy, and dependable. This dish proved that even a pantry staple could be transformed into comfort in just 5 minutes. You'd open a tin of whole potatoes, drain away the brine, pat them dry, and drop them into a hot skillet greased with butter or bacon fat. The trick was, patience let one side brown hard before turning. That golden crust was the prize. A pinch of salt, a crack of pepper, maybe paprika if luck allowed, and supper was served. It wasn't glamorous, but it filled plates and lifted spirits. Mothers stretched one can to feed 3 mouths, slicing the potatoes thinner to make them seem like more. The smell of sizzling starch drifted through thin walls, neighbors sometimes catching the scent and smiling knowingly. For children, the hiss in the pan meant hope. For parents, it meant pride that they could still put food on the table. In those browned coins of potato, there was more than flavor, there was dignity. A 5-minute reminder that survival wasn't about feasts, but about making the most of what you had. Before microwaves and store-bought caramel corn families turned to the stove for a treat that was sticky, smoky, and unforgettable: molasses kettle popcorn. You'd pop plain kernels in a heavy pot, then drizzle them with hot molasses melted down with a dab of butter. Stir fast, coat every puff, and in under 5 minutes you had a snack that clung to your fingers and your memory. It wasn't crisp like kettle corn or soft like candy. It was both chewy and crunchy, sweet with a hint of smoke. Every bite snapped and pulled. Sometimes your teeth stuck together, sometimes your fingers did too. Nobody minded. The smell of warm molasses drifted through hallways and drew kids running from every corner of the house. Families made it in wash tubs for barn dances, church socials, or simply when bad weather kept everyone indoors. Grandmothers stirred with wooden spoons blackened from years of use, while children snuck handfuls wrapped in napkins to save for later. What made it special wasn't just the taste, but the togetherness. Bowls passed around laughter, filling the room, sticky fingers licking clean. Molasses kettle popcorn wasn't just a snack, it was a 5-minute celebration, proof that joy could be cooked up even in the hardest times. Few dishes capture southern summers quite like fried green tomatoes. Firm, unripe tomatoes were sliced thick, dusted in cornmeal or sometimes a mix of flour and salt, and laid straight into a hot skillet shimmering with grease. The second they hit the pan, they sizzled, loud edges crackling as the tart flesh softened but held its shape. Golden on the outside, juicy and sharp, inside these slices were more than just food, they were tradition. Some folks sprinkled salt right after the flip, others splashed on hot sauce or tucked the slices into biscuits with bacon. No matter how they were served, they never lasted long. Children hovered by the stove with forks ready, hoping to snatch one before it cooled. The dish carried memory as much as flavor. Grandmothers fried them before Sunday, church fathers after long afternoons mowing grass, neighbors after gathering tomatoes from tangled backyard vines. The skillet's hiss mixed with porch sounds, the buzz of cicadas, screen doors slamming, kids laughing barefoot in the yard. It wasn't fancy fare, but it felt like home. Every crunchy bite reminded you of a season when life was simple, sunlight was long, and 5 minutes in a hot skillet could turn garden green into gold. In kitchens where money was tight but the skillet stayed hot, nothing came quicker or smelled better than fried bologna rounds. A thick slice of bologna edges scored, so it wouldn't curl too wild, slapped onto a dry skillet, was enough to wake up the whole house. Within seconds, it puffed into a little red dome, browned in patches that looked like burnt gold, and filled the room with a smoky, salty aroma that promised a meal in 5 minutes flat. For kids, it was often the first food they learned to fry. No oil, no fuss, just flip once or twice and eat it however you could. Some tucked it between cornbread or biscuits, others smeared mustard on the side. Parents sliced the bologna thick when times were good, thin when it had to stretch further. The magic was in the sound, a sizzle sharp enough to call children in from the porch. The quick press of a fork in the center to keep it flat, the scrape of a spatula as the round flipped. It wasn't gourmet, but it was dependable, filling, and strangely comforting. For countless families, fried bologna wasn't just meat, it was memory, a Saturday morning soundtrack, and proof that even the simplest scraps could taste like love. For many families scraping by on lean nights, hominy was the unsung hero. A can of those pale kernels drained and dried could turn into a hot, hearty dish in just minutes. Hominy quick fry was as simple as it was satisfying. Toss the kernels into a skillet slicked with bacon grease or butter and watch them blister, puff and pop like tiny fireworks. The sound alone was half the joy. First a soft hiss, then sharp snaps as the kernels jumped in the pan, sometimes catching a child on the wrist before rolling back down with laughter chasing behind. The smell turned nutty and warm, filling kitchens, with the comfort of something solid to eat even when cupboards looked bare. Seasoned with only salt and pepper, or maybe a pinch of chili powder if fortune allowed, it was a dish that ate like a meal. A fried egg on top turned it into breakfast for supper. A handful of onions gave it Sunday flavor. What made hominy memorable wasn't just its taste, but its speed. A tired mother could fry a can with one hand while balancing a baby on her hip. By the time the forks hit the table, the pan was scraped clean, a small miracle of warmth and nourishment in 5 minutes flat. When the supper dishes were cleared and the skillet still hot, many Depression-era mothers pulled out one last trick: brown sugar apple rings. With just a single apple, a dab of butter or bacon grease, and a sprinkle of brown sugar, dessert was born in under 5 minutes. The apple was sliced into thin rings, peel and all, then laid gently in the sizzling pan. A quick dusting of sugar, maybe a pinch of cinnamon or a drop of vinegar, and suddenly the kitchen smelled like carnival pie. The slices, browned edges, glassy centers, soft but steady, ready to wobble just right on a fork. Most nights, one apple had to stretch across a family. Thin slices meant more smiles, and children learned to savor every bite. Some families spooned the syrup over rice or pooled milk around the edges to catch the sweetness. Others simply passed the skillet, each spoonful warm with steam. What lingered wasn't just taste, but atmosphere. Boots drying by the door, coal stove ticking, and a child holding a sugar-glossed ring to the lamp to watch it glow like stained glass. For 5 minutes, the day's hardships faded, replaced by the quiet joy of sweetness shared. Some recipes never made it into glossy cookbooks. They lived in memory, passed quietly from mother to daughter, scribbled on flour sacks or Bible margins. One of those treasures was whispered milk gravy, a 5-minute miracle that turned not enough into plenty. It began with a dab of saved fat bacon grease, if you were lucky lard, if you weren't swirled in a hot skillet. A spoonful of flour was whisked in until golden, then milk was poured slowly, a splash at a time, until the mixture thickened into a creamy sauce. No timers, no measuring cups, just instinct, rhythm, and trust in the pan. This humble gravy was poured over boiled potatoes, leftover biscuits, or even canned vegetables when meat was scarce. On lean days, the gravy itself became the meal. One wide bowl in the center of the table, peppers sprinkled on top, and spoons shared among hungry hands. Thin when wallets were empty, richer when payday came, it always tasted like care more than cream. For children, the scrape of a wooden spoon on cast iron was the sound of comfort arriving. For mothers, it was a way to stretch scraps into dignity. And for families looking back years later, that simple milk gravy wasn't just food, it was love ladled out in 5 warm minutes. In the 1,922nd and 32nd, when thousands of men rode the rails in search of work, a simple dish called railroad bean mash became both food and fellowship. It wasn't written down in any cookbook. It was passed from hobo to hobo, porter to porter, whispered along the steel tracks of America. The recipe was as bare bones as life on the road. 1 can of beans heated right in its tin over a lantern flame or boxcar fire, smashed together with a stale heel of bread and seasoned with whatever could be bartered: salt, pepper, or if fortune smiled, a mustard packet swiped from a diner. 3 minutes, maybe less, and you had something hot, filling, and easy enough to eat with one hand while clinging to a moving freight car. Outsiders might have sneered at the slop, but for men riding the rails, it was gold. They shared cans, carved recipes into boxcar walls, and passed tips to newcomers: how to stretch 1 can into 2 meals, how to stir fast so the bread bounded all together. Years later, many who settled down still made this humble mash, not from hunger, but from memory. To them, it wasn't just beans and bread, it was survival, generosity, and proof that even in the loneliest miles, you could still find community in a can. During World War II, when ration books ruled the kitchen and meat was scarce, housewives turned to what they called emergency egg hash. The recipe wasn't glamorous. It came from the back pages of a 1,942 homemaker's guide, but it was a lifesaver when hungry children rushed home from school or unexpected guests knocked at the door. It started with torn bits of stale bread tossed into a greased skillet, then mixed with whatever scraps were on hand, a spoonful of onions, a drizzle of bacon fat, maybe even a chopped pickle if luck allowed. Once the bread browned, a couple of eggs were cracked right in, scrambled fast, and stirred until everything came together in a hot, messy tangle. In less than 2 minutes, supper was ready. What made this dish special was its flexibility. Some families splashed in a little vinegar to cut the grease, others added sauerkraut juice for bite. No two houses made it the same, but every version carried the same promise: something warm, filling, and quick. Even after rationing ended, many families kept cooking it, not out of need, but out of memory. The clang of the skillet, the hiss of bread hitting fat, the soft thump of an egg cracked one-handed. It was the sound of survival turned into tradition, proof that even in the leanest times, 5 minutes could taste like home. Back in the 1932nd, when the Great Depression tightened, every pantry families in small towns turned to one of the humblest suppers you could imagine: skillet tomato crumble. It wasn't much more than a can of stewed tomatoes tossed into a hot cast iron skillet with a spoon of bacon grease, then topped with crushed saltine crackers. No cheese, no herbs, no garnish, just heat, salt, and crunch. But for parents coming home from long days in the fields or kids washing coal dust from their hands, it was dinner. What made this dish unforgettable wasn't its taste, but its meaning. Mothers swore by it because it could be ready in 5 minutes flat, and it taught people how to turn almost nothing into something. The sound of crackers crackling in the skillet was like a promise no one would go to bed hungry that night. It was served straight from the pan, spoons digging in without ceremony, the steam rising like a small miracle at the end of a hard day. Decades later, grown men would tear up, remembering it not for the flavor, but for the comfort it carried. A true Depression-era trophy, simple food that meant survival, dignity, and love in 5 minutes flat. These 10 forgotten 5-minute recipes weren't just quick meals, they were lifelines, born from hard times, yet remembered with love. From skillet crumbles that stretched a can of tomatoes, to pan-browned potatoes that turned scraps into comfort, each one carried resilience and dignity to the dinner table. So, which of these vintage recipes do you remember or wish you could taste again? Drop a comment and share your story. And if you enjoyed this trip down memory lane, don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us for more timeless recipes that kept America strong when time and money ran short.